Hello everybody and welcome to Zero Mile ADV, a true beginner's guide to adventure motorcycling from a true beginner's perspective. Although I'm a little over a year in, so I may not be a true beginner anymore, but I still like to focus on the beginner stuff because that's what really got me into it. As you can see, we are sitting next to a different kind of adventure bike. This is a Harley Davidson Road King Special. This is a 2023 model. We're going to talk all about this bike and maybe what you should know if you're a beginner. You don't know anything about Harleys like I didn't, and I'm going to tell you all about this bike. So if you're new to the channel, please hit the subscribe button, hit the like button, the notification bell, all that cool stuff. Leave a comment below. Tell me, do you love or hate Harleys? And let's get into it. Okay, so let's first get into a few things I really like about this 2023 Harley Davidson Road King Special. One thing about my KTM 1290 Super Adventure, even if I'm driving it pretty easily, I feel like I get maybe 200 miles of the tank. I get close to that 200 mile-ish mark, and it's already time to get gas. With this beast here, this thing has a great gas tank. I don't know how big it technically is, but having put some miles on this bike, you can get about 250, 300 miles before you got to fill up. So it really kind of helps with the whole Road King status, right? You can go forever, and when you get this thing on the highway, it just cruises. It just feels amazing. So one thing that I really like about this bike is this large fuel tank and just the amount of miles you can do. So if you're looking to do some serious adventuring, maybe not so much off-road, but if you want to go on some big cross-country tours, that gas tank is definitely going to help. Okay, the next thing I want to talk about this bike that I really like, and I think is really good for a lot of beginners, is when I first started looking at a lot of the Harley Davidsons, especially the touring models, they're just so heavy. I think this is like a 750-pound bike, and I have gotten to ride the Road Glide, which is like if you're not familiar with Harleys, it's the fixed fairing on the front. They call it the shark nose. I've also gotten to ride a couple of street glides, and that's where it has that big fairing and windshield stuck to the front of the handlebars. Now, one thing I really like about the Road King is because there's no fairing attached, and either to the frame or to the fork, it just makes the front end a lot lighter, and it also reduces the weight anywhere from 75 to about 100 pounds depending on which bike you get. So with that being said, as heavy as this bike is, once it starts moving, you just get a little bit of momentum in it. It's super easy to handle. I was actually blown away. So the first time I rode one of these and I just got it on the road and I started cruising, I was like, wow, this thing is amazing, because it really just kind of glides, and it's actually super nimble, and the front end feels really light. So one thing that I love about this bike is just actually, for as big as it is, it actually feels kind of light, and it's super nimble for such a huge bike. Okay, another thing I want to talk about is that if you're new and you want to do long rides, it's kind of all about comfort. Maybe if you're not even new, but you want to be comfortable and feel good on the bike. With this Road King, especially once you get it up, let's get it up here, your seated position on these floorboards, it doesn't feel too far forward and it doesn't feel too far back. So with a lot of the Harleys, like when I rode the Indian Scout Bobber, it felt like the controls were really far forward, and so you felt kind of really stretched out. This has the big floorboards, and it's a little bit forward. It's kind of like a mid-forward, I should say, because it's not really a true mid-control, but it's also not truly a forward control. So it's actually really comfortable. So when you get this thing on the highway, it is super comfortable. And the first time I got on, I was like, I'm ready to ride to Vegas. It's like a 7.5 hour ride from here. I was like, I'm ready to go. This thing, I mean, it would just be awesome. It just feels like it wouldn't be very fatiguing, because that's the one thing about the KTM, is that bike just wants to eat you alive every time you get on it. Like it vibrates, the seat isn't terribly comfortable, where this bike, it just kind of feels like, you know, an armchair with wheels. So the comfort also has to be something that I really, really like. Okay, another thing that I really like about this bike is it truly is a Road King. When you're new to riding motorcycles, I don't know for most of you, but for a lot of people like myself, highway speeds were terrifying, right? I remember getting my KTM on the highway. For like the first couple months, I was riding side roads, and I said, you know what, I'm taking the highway back home. And out here, the speed limit's 75, so everybody's doing like 80 at least. And I remember getting up to 75 and just like holding on for dear life. It was terrifying. Now, with this thing, it is just so planted and solid. I feel that if you're a newer rider and you get on the highway, it is going to give you buttloads of confidence because of just how well planted it is on the highway and at speeds. The other nice thing is that it has torque for days. So it doesn't rev very high. I think max is probably like 5 or 5,500 RPMs, maybe 66,000 RPMs. But at low RPMs, really it's got torque for days, meaning that if you're in the wrong gear and you're in too high or too low of a gear and you're coming to a stop or whatever, you could easily start this thing in second gear. So it is super comfortable and planted on the highway. It's got torque for days, so when you're on the highway and you need to get past a semi, just give it some gas and you're going to easily get by. So even if you're doing 75 miles an hour, you need to bump it up to 80, 85 to get around that semi, to get out of that wind. It's going to do it without any problems, and it's going to be super stable and comfortable. One last thing that I really like about this bike that I was super surprised by is how well it can corner. For a huge bike, if you saw my cornering video, I took it through that same canyon heading up towards Mesa, Colorado. It's very windy and twisty, follows the river. This thing can corner way better than my skill ability. Obviously I'm new, so I don't have that good a skill, but you can seriously lean this bike and it could go way faster than I could push it. I think if you wanted to turn this into quote unquote a performance bagger, you could rip canyons on this thing. It actually handles really well. It doesn't feel super sluggish. It actually feels really solid and planted in the corners. It just corners really, really well. I was super surprised by this. I actually met a guy who had another touring model. He had kind of custom built a road glide, and he talked about how he goes and rides with other sport bike riders because of how well it handles. And surprisingly enough, this being on basically the same frame but without the whole front nose fairing, it handles really, really well. So super surprised by just the overall handling characteristics of such a big bike. Now we're going to take a tour of the bike and we're going to look at a few customizations that this Road King Special has that I think it just makes it a really unique and cool bike. The first has to be this windshield. It does come off, as you can see, it pulls straight off, so it's easier to take, super easy to take on and off, but I really like it. A couple things I really like about it. I like this vent, so you can adjust the airflow through here, and it's also just nice to have some wind protection. Now, downside to this windscreen, it has the height, at least for me, it being 5'9" on a good day. I do get a decent amount of wind buffeting off of this when I get on the highway. So the noise isn't that great. Definitely would recommend, for me at least, wearing earplugs. I always wear earplugs on longer rides anyways, but with this one especially, just because I do get some wind buffeting. But I do really like the look of it. I think it gives the bike a really cool feel without the full fairing. So just like and it's tinted, and it's got this like tinted look to it. So I think it really matches kind of the Special style. Another thing about the Special over the standard Road King is everything is blacked out. If you can see, it's got the black wheels, engine's all blacked out, the exhaust is all blacked out, everything is blacked out. So I really like that about the Special edition versus the standard Road King is the black. And so with this back to the windscreen, with that kind of smoked windscreen, I think it just looks really nice. Now, this bike also has kind of the Thrashin supply kit on it, so it's got the Thrashin floorboards. They do make an extension, which I think would be nice to give you a little bit more room, but I do like how much it lightens it up. The standard floorboards are really heavy. These just kind of lighten it up and give you better footing. Now, and a little bit better feel. So when you're riding the bike, the feel with these floorboards, you just kind of feel the bike a little bit more, you have more input, because the stock ones have this big rubber pad and then these rubber bushings to kind of comfort out, to smooth out any bumps, which I guess could be nice for like an anti-fatiguing thing, but if you like to be able to feel the bike and have better input as you shift your weight around the bike, these definitely help. This bike also has their shift arms. So one thing that I don't love about the Harleys is just kind of how clunky the shifting is on the transmission. If you've ridden any other motorcycles like BMWs, Ducatis, the KTM, really any adventure bike, the shifting is very, very smooth. This is very clunky. Like when you shift into gear, you really feel it. It's like clunk, clunk, clunk. So you really feel it. This shift arm and this linkage just actually makes that shifting a little bit easier. You don't have to use quite as much force. I also like the aesthetics of these as well. The other thing that kind of continuing with the thrashing parts theme on this bike is the T-bar handlebars. So this bike has the 6.5-inch pullback risers with a low bend T-bar. So the bike comes with a 9-inch kind of like mini ape, and it sits way out here. So when you ride this bike, for me, especially being short, the apes are kind of hot, they're higher, and they're really wide. So any low speed stuff where you're going to turn, like you're really reaching out here. Now with this, the reach is still decent, but it's not bad. This is also a bit more comfortable for me at, I think this is with 6.5 and then 2.5 inch, you know, 2 inches, like 8 inches versus the 9. So it's a little lower. For me, I'm not a like up here kind of guy. I'm more of a down here kind of person. So I think these bars are just more comfortable, and they're a little bit narrower, and it feels like it just gives you more of an adventure bike feel. So like if you sit on the KTM or any other adventure bike, it just kind of has more of that feel and that relaxed, where your arms are kind of more down here in a natural position versus like here, or like I guess in the Harley scene, it's like the taller your risers, the more horsepower you have or something ridiculous, right? So like people love to have their bars up here. What I really like about this setup is that they're a little lower and kind of more in a standard ADV setup. Okay, now let's talk about some things I don't necessarily like. When I first got on this bike, I actually really liked the positioning of this gauge, that it was down here, because with Harleys, like, it's all about customization. They're kind of a really expensive boilerplate, for lack of a better term, and then that you can then kind of add your own flair to. However, now having ridden this bike for a few hundred miles, I'm not sure how I feel about having the gauge cluster down here, because when you're up here and you're riding and you're like this, it would be nice to have it here, right? So you can kind of constantly monitor and see how fast you're going. So when you're on the road, if you're not just kind of going in traffic, you constantly have to kind of do this number. So you're kind of looking down and up and down and up. So this is one thing I'm not a huge fan of. A second note on this gauge cluster, as expensive as these bikes are, I think this bike starts at $23,500 if you get the standard black one, before all the fees and dealer fees and taxes and everything else. And you do get kind of in this gauge cluster, you do get some digital information. So it will give you, like right now it's in the RPM and gears, what gear you're in. It does give you tire pressure sensors, so that's front, rear, your odometer, your trip odometer, 2 trip odometers remaining. So currently there's 95 miles left before it's time to get fuel with this guy, so it kind of has a fuel range mileage, and then of course a clock. But as expensive as this bike is, it would have been nice if Harley would do like that nice digital gauge like they're doing on their Sportster S, and like Indian does on their Chieftain and Up models, where it's like a digital tachometer, so you can get a lot more information and a lot cleaner, maybe be able to change the display. Now I think the old school tachometer adds a nice feel, but I'm just not sure for the cost. I think I would prefer the digital, more modern gauge. Okay, so let's talk about another thing I'm not a huge fan of on this bike. This bike is the special edition, so it has like the CVO style stretch bags. If you're new to Harleys and you don't know all the lingo, CVO is kind of their like ultra limited, super fancy motorcycles. So they come out with a CVO Road Glide, which is the fixed fairing shark nose one, and a CVO Street Glide, but they have pretty much all the bells and whistles. And one noted feature on the Street Glide, on the CVOs, is this like stretched bag look. And so on the Road King Special, they put the stretched bags. I'm not a huge fan of the stretch bags, honestly. I would want the standard, like there's a Road Glide ST, which is their like sport touring model. So they bump up the horsepower, put on some different controls and stuff. I think they even do like their better exhaust, that kind of stuff, better air cleaner. And it comes with these like chopped bags. I like the looks of those chopped bags a little bit better. I think it kind of gives it a sportier look. There's a guy that works in Arizona that works on a lot of Harleys, has a super cool channel if you haven't checked it out. It's called Keursi, Keursi. If you haven't checked him out, check him out. Super cool channel. But you know, he just built a road glide that was super cool that they're selling at San Diego Harley Davidson, and has these really nice chop bags. So I'm not a huge fan of these stretch bags, and actually when you open up the interior of these bags, it doesn't actually give you that much more room. It's kind of more of an aesthetic thing. I guess you could like roll it a couple extra t-shirts or something like that if you wanted to roll them individually, not put them in a bag to pull them out. So it does give you a little extra room, but I do like the bags. They're very nice. There's a good quality construction. They're easy to move. They're easy to open. The hardware is all very quality. I'm just not a huge fan of the stretch bag look. I prefer them to be slightly wider and kind of chopped, a little bit shorter. Okay, so now let's talk about my final and I think biggest complaint with most Harley Davidsons is that they're just very expensive. When you compare the cost of these bikes to a lot of the ADV bikes, even if you look at like the Lowrider ST, which is kind of a smaller bike, bigger motor, smaller bags, but it has a windscreen stuff, not into the full touring, so it's like the soft tail kind of thing. Or Dyna, get the soft tail and Dyna thing confused. You know, those start, you're gonna be around 24, 25. You can get a KTM Super Adventure S with most of the stuff you need. I think now they're at 20, and you get a digital gauge, you get connectivity, you get electronic suspension, you get a USB port. I mean, that's the one thing that kills me on this. I think on the Street Glide and the Road Glide, you have USB ports, but on a bike you're gonna be at $30,000 out the door by the time you add tax, depending upon where you live. If you're just paying MSRP, there's no USB port on this thing, so you're paying close to 30 grand and you can't even charge your phone. Now there are some kits out there on Amazon you can get to make a USB port, but you shouldn't have to do that. The other thing is I think Harley knows that most people want to customize their bikes, and so I just feel that they're super expensive. There's a Harley dealer Davidson that does a lot of great videos. It's a Laidlaws. They're based out of Orange County or the LA area, and they did a whole video like, oh, our Harley's, you know, really expensive. And they talked about the price and, you know, the increase in price and inflation, and so they've relatively stayed the same. However, I think when you compare the price of a Harley Davidson to any other brand out there, say you wanted to get the new, brand new BMW 1250 GS Adventure that has everything, and you get the Adventure model with the roll cage, the panniers, I mean, you'd be at the same cost as this bike. So that's the one hard thing for me to swallow, is just the amount of features. You don't really get much with these bikes. You can do a ton to them, but it means you have to put more money into it to kind of build it the way you want. So that's probably my biggest complaint about this motorcycle. I think it's awesome. I love the way it rides. I love everything about it. It is super cool, but they're just very expensive compared to other bikes in the market, and especially if you're interested in getting out and having some fun and doing some adventures on a motorcycle, they're just very expensive. That's I think the biggest downfall to Harley Davidson. So with that, tell me, are you a love 'em or hate 'em Harley Davidson rider? If you stuck around this long, thank you. Hit the subscribe button, hit the notification bell, tell all your friends. Just helps grow the channel. And until next time, stay safe out there.